Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to keep discussing the Pirc opening. So this happens after e4, d6, and then we're going to have d4, knight f6, and we're going to discuss kind of what to do from here. So if you like content like this and want to see more of it, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. So my recommendation here, one of my recommendations here, and a recommendation that's been in my opening repertoire, but also a recommendation that was in Kasparov's opening repertoire. This is how Kasparov normally approached the Pirc, with one of the most notable exceptions being his immortal game against Vasil Topalov. You can play the move pawn to f3 here. And this is actually a really clever idea, is you're saying, I don't want to play against your Pirc. I would much rather just play against a King's Indian defense. And you're basically going to turn the Pirc into a King's Indian, and you're going to turn it into a very specific King's Indian. You're going to turn this into a Samish King's Indian. So you're going to follow up f3. So like if they continue with pawn to g6, you're going to follow up pawn to f3 with pawn to c4, and you're going to be going into a mainline Samish King's Indian. Now from here, black is going to have a lot of choices. He can play Benoni, he can play some of the main lines against the Samish, he can play e5, he can play knight c6, he can play a pano. I'll show you in a second how you're going to play against all of those if you're an e-pawn player and you only play this against the Pirc. You don't play d4 as your main line, because this is what I did for years. And this is also what Kasparov did. Kasparov was not a d4 player, not a primary d4 player. He was a primary e4 player, and he would play d4 as a secondary weapon. So the only other option that they have is they can try to kind of turn this back into something else. So they can play an early pawn to e5 here, and Kasparov ran into this on a number of occasions. So, for example, Kasparov versus Wells continued with simply d5, and then we saw c6, c4, so still kind of a King's Indian. Queen b6, knight c3, bishop e7, so we're not fianchettoing the bishop, but other than that, he's just getting a good position with white. He's got more space and he's got a good position. So that game continued knight on gd2, castles, knight g3, we had cd5, knight a4, queen back, c captures d5, and it's just a good King's Indian where eventually we're going to have a weakness on d6. We've got an open c file, we've got easy development for white. White's going to continue with moves like bishop e3, queen d2, bishop e2, castles kingside, etc. And he's just going to end up with an advantage over on the queen side. This is exactly what happened in the game. So the game continued like so. Kasparov just safeguarding all of his pieces, castling kingside, getting his pieces to safety, and then eventually breaking through in the middle and having some sort of advantage. Just playing f4 and saying, look, I have an advantage in the middle of the board, and white was better in this game, and white went on to eventually win the game. White was doing very well. So if we go back to kind of, we'll call it the main line of this, we'll say black plays g6, you play c4, they play bishop g7, knight c3, castles kingside, bishop e3. So you're in a mainline Samish, and you're not normally a d-pawn player. Well, you don't have to play all the complicated, usually if you're a mainline d4 player, a lot of times their preference is to play the more positional lines of the Samish. So when they get confronted with something like the Benoni, they tend to want to play it very positionally and very strategically. They tend to try to hold their center together, etc. And then, the same thing when they play against the Pano or when they play against the mainline e5. They always try to play it very positionally and very strategically, but when you have more space and you have good development, your position is actually very versatile. You have a number of different ways that you can play the position as white, and if you're normally an e-pawn player, your instincts are going to more gear towards, hey, how can I attack with this opening? How can I just play this opening very, very aggressively and in a style that I'm kind of familiar with as an e-pawn player? And you can do that. The position is versatile enough to definitely let you do that. So one example of that is just, let's say they play like a Pano. So they play knight c6, you play knight on g2, and they play a6, you play queen d2, they play rook b8. Now there's a number of different ways white can continue from here, and certainly white has tried numerous different positional approaches. But you don't have to be positional. You can just play h4, just like you would in a Yugoslav attack, just trying to play for mate, just h4, h5, bishop h6, I'm just going to play for mate, and after h5, just castle queenside. And the die is cast, you're going to play for mate. And this is actually a very unclear position. It's not at all clear that this is a bad strategy for white. White actually might just have a winning attack here. None of this has been completely worked out. None of this has solid assessments on it. Even if you put an engine on this, engines will jump back and forth depending on the line. So one great example of where this went well was in Salov versus Khalifman in Minsk in 1987. And that game continued b5. And then the general consensus here is that bishop h6 is apparently the way to go. Like, we should just play bishop h6 and just exchange off this Turkish squared bishop, much like we would in a Yugoslav attack. Now, I've tried this other move in the past, this g4 move, and older engines used to bounce around on the assessment. Especially after like h captures g4, and then I would insert something like knight to g3 here, and these positions got goofy because older engines would assess these positions as nearly winning for black, and then they would change their mind and say that white was winning later. But newer engines have started to actually give this some trouble. They're playing much more accurate defensive moves with the black pieces, and I've been having trouble making this work. So it's made me think that maybe this old idea of just putting the bishop on h6 immediately, as Salov played against Khalifman all the way back in 1987, might be the way to go. So, I mean, these guys that played back in the 70s and 80s, without the use of computers, I mean, these guys, they weren't completely clueless. They knew what was going on, and they knew what the basic ideas behind the position actually were. So in this game continued b captures c4, and then we saw g4 now. And of course, g4 now is just, it should be just completely sound. And actually, he nearly had a winning position according to the computer. After knight b4, knight g3, the computer was already just declaring that white was just doing much, much better here. So after knight b4, knight g3, he continued with solid attacking moves against the black king in a style that we're kind of familiar with. We exchange off the dark squared bishop. We just play d5 just to gain some space, get our pawn out of the line of fire, and then we're just preparing to bust open that king side and play for mate. And that's exactly what he did. He just played f4, f5, just going to bust open that king side after weakening the dark squares. And after a few more moves, black's position was completely and totally lost. His dark squares are toast. White is actually threatening to just come in with queen h6 and queen to g7 with mate. But he had one more move up his sleeve that he wanted to play right before he did that, and that was the move pawn to e5. And then Khalifman resigned. Now, the whole point of pawn to e5 is to clear this e4 square for both the knights, and it also clears this diagonal for the bishops, both of which is relevant. So, for example, if d takes e5, now we're going to play queen h6. Now, the only way to defend mate on g7 is rook g8, and then after knight on g to e4, this position is completely winning. The rook on f2 is going to defend b2. This knight is going to come to g5, in which case queen h7 will be mate. So the only defensive try here would be something like g5, but now we've cleared that diagonal for the bishop. So we can either play knight g5, which should be completely winning, or apparently more effective is just knight d6 threatening mate on f7, forcing queen d6, and then bishop d3 is also completely winning. So either of these lines are just completely winning, but, to Khalifman's credit, Khalifman saw all that, and he didn't want any part of it. So this is kind of just another way that you can play against the Pirc. You can turn it into a King's Indian, and then you don't have to play all these super positional lines in the King's Indian. If you're playing the same-ish variation, in the same-ish, we do have this option of just playing chess the way we're more familiar with as e-pawn players. We can play these early h4s, early castle queenside positions. We can just go nuts and we can just play for mate. And this is fine, with a few exceptions where we're going to want a castle kingside. But those aren't terribly difficult to figure out, and they're not really all that difficult to add to a repertoire. So anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.